Mike, I don't know if you've noticed this, but Brad has put his email in the chat for those contacts that you might recommend to him.
Okay, I got it.
Alrighty. Just another few seconds here, just in case. Thank you, Carl. Carl says we did a great job. I believe him. Carl doesn't lie. Alrighty, folks. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If one of y'all, and I'll hand this over to Carl since I know Carl's in the audience. Carl, can you see my Birds on Bridges presentation there? Hopefully he will respond. Carl says an emphatic yes. So I'm going to go with all of you can see my new presentation here. It should be showing up. All right. All right. So we're going to move off from pollinators and we're going to Lee Carlton. Thank you very much, Lee. I'm going to move off of pollinators and I'm going to go to another topic that we deal with in the biology department, which is migratory birds, or birds on bridges, most specifically. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I was actually a bird biologist in my former employment, where working in Colorado, basically my full-time job was dealing with birds and bird nesting on construction sites. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about KYTC and our dealings with migratory birds on bridges, nesting on bridges, and what our mitigation for those species are, and what we've done in the past, and where we hope to move in the future. So, for those of you who don't know, bridges, even though they are artificial, they are not found in nature, most of them, they create ideal habitat for migratory birds. The reason for this is that, you know, most birds, especially smaller species, they love crevices. The bigger species, they will nest up in high places. There are some species that are very specific to nesting over water. So on top of all of these features that they replicate in an artificial manner in relation to nature, there is also an aspect of nesting on bridges that is indicative of loss of habitat. So some of these species have experienced habitat loss in the past, and where these bridges unintentionally make up for that habitat in an artificial manner. Bird nests can be found anywhere from the top of the trusses to the bottom of the supports and everywhere in between. So there's nowhere on a bridge that is typically safe. Even if it's a flat surface, there are birds that are specialized in their nest making capabilities, such as swallows, to fill in those gaps. The nesting season for birds depends. It can last anywhere from January to October. There are birds actively nesting or beginning to nest or ending their nesting season between those months. So unless you plan on removing a bridge in November to December, there is a chance that you may have to deal with your birds on your bridges. And if you're thinking that there is a design aspect to this, that we can try to get around it, there is no bridge design that I have ever come across that will prevent all species of birds from nesting on your bridge, especially considering habitat loss. Sometimes birds will nest in unconventional places. If they think that there's even a slight chance of success, they may put their nest there. And I've seen birds nest in some crazy places before. So why are we at KYTC concerned about this? Well, the main reason, the main legal reason, is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. And it is a federal law that prohibits taking or harassment, trade, purchase, deliver, whatever have you, of any bird or any part of that bird or an egg from that bird. An active nest is included in that. A non-active nest is not included in that. So if you come across an empty nest on your bridge, you can legally remove that part of the bird and its nesting process. But we're going to talk a little bit today about what we do when it comes to finding nests on bridges. Some of you may have heard that the Migratory Bird Treaty Act has been in the news lately because there is some drive within the current administration to change some vital aspects of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. I will not get into the politics of it, but basically it would allow certain, if not all, construction activities or activities associated with running a company or any kind of thing like that. Basically, it boils down to, unless your intention is to kill the bird, then you have no impact on the population of that bird, which you might see that as being kind of problematic. Politics aside with that, and personal opinion aside, this change has already been challenged heavily, not just by environmental groups that are openly suing the U.S. government for trying to make this change, but recently, U.S. District Court struck down this change, saying that it was contrary to the law, to the intent of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So the reason that I bring this up is that even if this change happens and it becomes legal to remove these nests, remove these birds, to kill these birds, to kill these eggs or these chicks, we at KYTC are not planning on moving forward in that direction. The main reason for that being is that overall, our government and our mitigation is moving forward in a more ecologically friendly manner. And we don't see any signs of that really changing. We may take a few steps back, but the trajectory so far is moving towards ecological awareness and friendliness as opposed to moving backward. So we are going to continue on the path that we intended to continue on, in spite of the legislation that is being highly contested right now. Another aspect of why we at KYTC are continuing forward in a more ecologically aware standpoint is that many of these historic nests of these breeding pairs are known to the general public. And I know that seems a little strange, but there are ornithologists and bird enthusiasts out there who have been watching this same breeding pair maybe for 10, 15 years. And if suddenly they show up and you're knocking eggs into the water, that might cause us to get sued for another reason. So that's another reason we're going to continue in this trajectory. The third and final reason I want to bring up today on why we're continuing the way we are is that we have a partnership with Kentucky State Fish and Wildlife. And in fact, they have become our main source of mitigation guidance. And we want to honor that partnership with them. We want to continue that partnership with them, and we will rely upon them because eventually the way things are piling out is that we will need to do mitigation for migratory birds at some point in the future. And having this partnership with Kentucky State Fish and Wildlife and honoring it is far more behooving to us than it would be to kind of push it aside. So that's the reason that KYTC is moving forward with mitigation. So when does the Migratory Bird Treaty Act not apply? Because there are instances where it does not apply. Times when the MBTA does not apply to a bird that is nesting on your bridge, and it's when that bird is non-native, exotic, invasive to North America. Four of the main species that we deal with here in Kentucky are, going from left to right, the house sparrow, the rock pigeon or the pigeon, the European starling, and up there at the top is the Eurasian collared dove. These are species that were brought into North America intentionally, and they have not only found a niche, but have gone wild in their population growth. House sparrows are those little birds you see at McDonald's that everybody loves to feed, and they're all over the place. I think anybody who has been near a bridge is aware of pigeons. They're disgusting. And the European starlings, if you've ever seen those huge flocks of birds that fly over cities, that's more than likely the European starling. And the Eurasian collared dove is an interesting exotic invasive because it actually came here of its own accord. By its migrational patterns, but its migrational patterns are actually changing because of climate change. So it is a species that does not belong here. We do not have to mitigate for it. We can, remove active nests, but it is one of those species that kind of is entering a new world of mitigation where we have to consider climate change when it comes to these new and invasive species coming in. So there are times when the MBTA does not apply. So let's talk about when it does apply. Species that typically utilize bridges. These can typically, a bald eagle will not nest on a bridge, but it may nest close to your bridge because a bald eagle is actually a fisher bird. Most of its diet consists of carrion and also fish. So while you may not have an eagle nest on your bridge specifically because they are extremely large, extremely heavy structures, you may have one within a half a mile of your construction site. And if you have a bald eagle nest, because the bald eagles are under their own protection act, the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, they have their own set of mitigation guidelines that are very strict. So even if it's not physically on your bridge, you need to be aware of any bald eagles that may be nesting nearby. The biggest offender that I come across and that most of us come across are osprey. Osprey are the ones that are going to be nesting on the very top of your bridge in a very visual way, and they really love our bridges. So those are the ones that you're going to see a lot of the time. Multiple swallow species. Cliff swallows are the biggest offenders. They love to make their little mud nest, just thousands of them along the side of your bridge. And then you'll have the barn swallow, which will be underneath. But multiple swallow species. Barn owls love to be on the underside of bridges, inside the deck, inside those crevices. And owls are the tricky ones because they don't actually build a nest. They actually just need a flat level surface. They throw some feathers in there, and that's it. One day you'll come in and maybe you'll miss an egg. You'll just see some debris and not think anything of it. And then 2 weeks go by and you come back and there's 6 owl chicks staring at you. So some of these nests are not as obvious as others, which is why it's so important when we do our bridge inspections to really know what we're looking for. Great horned owls will also nest in bridges. They typically like to take over a nest from other species. They don't build their own nest. They actually come in like very early in the year. Those are the ones setting up in January and February. And they'll take over old osprey nests. They'll take over old ravens nests. They're a little more obvious, but I've seen them nest on football stadiums. So they're very typically acclimated to people. But the most important thing that you can probably take away from any of this is that any bird protected by the MBTA that likes your bridge and decides to nest on it is under the protections of the MBTA. Even if it's robins, anything. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. The KYTC, since we're still kind of new to the whole mitigation thing and what we need to cover as far as the MBTA is concerned, we're mostly focused on those bigger, more obvious species or those colony nesters like the swallows. So, mitigation guidelines. Basically, when it comes to mitigation guidelines for KYTC, they are broad overviews that must be specialized depending upon upon specifics, whether it's the species of the bird, And within the species of the bird, you have different tolerances for disturbance between breeding pairs. There are some bald eagles that will not tolerate any kind of different levels of disturbance within a half a mile of their nest. There are some bald eagles that are so accustomed to people that you can mow the grass right under their nesting tree and they don't care. So that is something we take into consideration. The schedule of your project. If you know that you have an active bird nest on your bridge and you are able to schedule the demolition of that bridge or to schedule the demolition of that section of that bridge in the inactive season, that's something that we always try to aim for because it makes it so much easier. The location of the nest is something to consider as well. If you have one nest on a section of bridge that you can put off, great. If you have 5 nests of osprey all throughout your bridge, that's a whole other situation. And then if the main thing that we try to keep in mind whenever it comes to mitigation of any kind is what is its likelihood of success? Because we don't want to do something that's going to take a whole lot of time, a whole lot of money, and not work anyway. And one of the things that we often turn to when it comes to mitigation is exclusion and deterrence. Exclusion is when you make it impossible for your bridge to be infiltrated by bird nests. One of the ways we do this for swallows in particular is to net the bridge. If we put up a temporary netting situation where the swallows just simply can't get in there and get their nests established, that will exclude them from your bridge and you don't have to worry about them. And then you have deterrence, which the bird can get to it, the bird can be next to it, it can even land on it, but the very presence of that object deters them from nesting in that area. So whenever you use exclusion or deterrence, you also have to keep in mind there is always inherent risk. There are some situations where you can put up a deterrent and that bird does not care. It will nest in the deterrent, on the deterrent, under the deterrent. It's incredibly frustrating, but it's something we have to keep in mind. You also have to keep in mind that some of these deterrents, specifically netting and exclusionary tactics, they need to be properly established and put up. I have seen multiple times when exclusionary netting was put up, it was not put up properly, and dozens of dead birds ended up tangled up in the netting. It was not a good PR day. So always keep that in mind that deterrents and exclusionaries, each one comes with its own risk of either not working or being really bad. So keep that in mind. Now, with this, I wanted to focus on a case study where we dealing with osprey specifically. And this is based off of a paper that is written by over State Fish and Wildlife. And I got to give her enormous kudos for writing this. Lee Carlton is a co-author on this, and so am I. But Kate, this is her brainchild. So she's the one who kind of consolidated all the information we gathered from a situation we ran into and made determinations of future mitigation based off of it. You all can read the abstract, obviously, but basically, this is referring to the US 60 and US 80 bridges over the Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley. Some of you may be familiar with this, some of you not. It's over in D1 in the Paducah area. And it basically talks about what was attempted, what worked, and what didn't. And spoilers, not much worked. Just letting you in on that right now. So, when we knew that we were going to have to redo these bridges because they were built in the 1930s and it was time to tear them down and build them back up again, they were aware that they had multiple osprey nesting on each site. So they set up mitigation tactics well ahead of the actual demolition. One of the mitigation tactics that they did was They set up 8 nesting platforms within 2,500 meters of the bridges, for each bridge, I believe. And they set up exclusionaries, they set up deterrents, they did everything ahead of time that you're supposed to do when it comes to osprey. What they didn't realize was that osprey are not like typical birds in that they have nest fidelity out the window. So it was already understood when we went into this project that these nesting pairs had been there since estimated of 1999. So this is a situation where the birds had been there for a long time. They had, quote unquote, claimed the bridge as their nesting area. And this was not a new set of birds that had never been here before. This was birds that have been here and had successful nests a long time. So when construction actually started, or was trying to get started, and the osprey came back after all these deterrents were put into place, the deterrents didn't really work. So they tried removing nesting material. The osprey would come back the next day and put it back. They tried putting deterrents on top of exactly where the nests were. And as you can tell from the photograph, the osprey would come in and they would just put nesting material on top of the deterrent. It gets to the point where the osprey are so desperate to lay their egg that they don't have a choice. They just lay it on bare steel. For the sake of time, I'm going to move a little quickly. As you can tell, there were 2 eggs laid on this bare steel beam to the left. There were osprey hanging out next to people who were working on the bridge, actively being harassed by them, not really being deterred from making nests, though. And as you can tell from this photograph, this osprey wasn't deterred in the least. That is an osprey that is actively nesting underneath of a deterrent. So what did we learn? When it came to osprey, we had this idea